Hello, my name is Jeff Rolka. I want to thank you for checking out my video. I get this question very frequently in the comments and in my teaching, which is, what is my vocal range? What is my vocal range designation? What type of voice do I have? What is my FOC? Well, here's the thing. Most of you, I suspect, can correctly identify what this instrument is. But there's a vast difference between understanding what something is and actually being able to make use of it. It's not about what you have. It's about how you use it. And the thing about singing is that the more that we learn the sustainable, efficient use of our voices, the more that our vocal range designations, or as I usually refer to it, the FOC, our FOCs, reveal themselves. So the more you work on your vowel alignment, the more you work on your apogeo breath management, your breath support if you prefer, then the natural, sustainable functioning of your voice will come further and further to the forefront. Your registration events will even out, and in so doing, as those registration events even out, you will notice the tendencies in your voice, and that will tell you your FOC. That will tell you your voice range designation. But here's something else. As I'm fond of saying, don't take my word for it. Let me give you a brief excerpt from Mr. Miller here, who's a very renowned voice pedagogue and opera singer, but his teachings are still relevant to us, even though the technique would seem to be focused primarily on opera. This is the thing. Determining the FOC, which means vocal range designation, of a singer is not the primary concern for the teacher. Of much greater importance is the freeing of the instrument from the tensions of malfunction and from preconceived ideas that so often contribute to incorrect vocal production. Now, I am not going to be the one to talk about correct versus incorrect. What I talk about is balance and imbalance. And the thing is that when we get into the habit of using our voice in an imbalanced way, it can obscure the location of these registration events. That makes it not just difficult, but basically impossible to truly determine one's vocal range designation. Because if you have pushed it so far up, or you have pushed it so far down or whatever, that there's no sense and habit around where that registration event is, that you have to learn to sing with a balanced vowel alignment, balanced phonation, and then you'll find the registration events and you'll find your vocal range designation or FOC. That being said, I'm going to take you through a variety of things to look for in the 5 main categories of vocal range designation: soprano, mezzo, contralto, which is often talked about as an alto, tenors, and baritones. Each one of those has variations within it. So like the tenors, for example, there's like 8 different tenors that you can refer to just by way of getting started, and different schools of thought will think about them differently too. So let's dive into this. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. If you haven't yet, I hope you'll do so now. Lots of ways to support my channel. Those are all in the description. First and foremost, I want to stress again, old habits will obscure the registration events, and those registration events are big clues as to what your vocal range designation is. Additionally, if you've been singing along with the videos on my channel, and you sing along with the alto range one sometime, and you sing along with the tenor one sometime, and sometimes you sing with the mezzo, there is an awful lot of overlap in all of the vocal range designations. Now, if you happen to be a bass and a soprano, there's still a point of overlap, but it's not very much. The alto and the tenor, however, overlap almost entirely, except that the points of transition are different, and I'll get into those. Now, let's talk about sopranos for starters. Sopranos, you will have a secondo passaggio about here, F sharp 5. That is the transition point where you depart entirely from your chest voice and are in your head voice. Your primo passaggio will be about here, though. Now, that's a lot of space. This is the middle range of the soprano voice. That's part of what makes the soprano so flexible. If you think you might be a soprano, you will notice this great expanse between those transition points. But here's the catch. The secondo passaggio in the soprano voice can often be sung right past without much notice of it, particularly if you studied classical before trying to sing popular forms. So that secondo passaggio location, you might just not even notice it, and that can be a bit confusing when you are trying to make the determination around your range designation. What's more telling is difficulties around E flat 4. If that transition point is really difficult, if you have a difficulty time getting out of your middle voice range into what is truly the chest voice range of the soprano voice, that is a very telling indicator that you might be a soprano. But again, old habits without proper vowel alignment and without proper subglottic air pressure, without proper support, will obscure those locations. And if you go into it thinking you're a soprano, you can tailor your results to generate that outcome. So you have to really focus on vowel alignment and airflow and proper use of your voice, and that will then reveal how your voice is operating. It will reveal your FOC to you. Moving on to the mezzos. Mezzos will have their secondo passaggio here. Their primo passaggio will be here. Give or take, I mentioned this in one of my other videos, we're not built to Western tonal music. Our voices don't map directly onto the piano keyboard. I mean, I'm sure there are people's voices out there who do, but as a general rule, a little bit of flexibility is to be expected. We're not built to specs, we are built to our own specs. Mezzos, you'll have this fairly wide-ish, a major 7th, middle voice range. The thing I notice about mezzos is that, and this is true as well and even to a greater degree with the contraltos, mezzos, the transition between the upper and middle voices, which is here, B4, like B4, not as in previously, but the note B4, that transition can often feel like or behave the way a secondo passaggio might for your tenor, baritone, male vocal friends who have instruments that are built that way. So very frequently you'll hear untrained voices, and when they hit that secondo passaggio, it'll abduct or separate the vocal fold, and you get this airy sound. That middle voice registration event can frequently go that way for the untrained mezzo voice. The secondo passaggio in the mezzo voice can frequently get obscured because of a propensity to push the chest voice harder and harder past that transition point of the middle voice. So the mezzos sometimes will get into this habit of pushing those notes out, and then it can make for a very dramatic or impossible transition at E5 across the secondo passaggio. Sopranos generally don't fall into that. The cricothyroid activity or the head voice activity will increase quite nicely throughout their middle voice range. So as they start down here and continue to ascend towards their soprano secondo passaggio, that head voice activity increases, and they'll sing occasionally right past that secondo passaggio without much difficulty. So let's take these two range designations here and talk about some things that you can do to try to figure it out. If you think you're a soprano, working through vocalizations that start here and descend past that pitch, you don't have to go too low. You just have to try to sing with an even, sustainable vowel formation with good airflow on those descending scales, and see how your voice performs as you descend past that pitch. Mezzos, I often find that noting your vocal function around B4 is a very, very good telltale. Additionally, if you can phonate comfortably to getting to about here and ultimately here, that G3, that can oftentimes tell you a bit about how your voice might be trending. That being said, it's not impossible for the soprano vocalist to sing to that area. It's just going to have a different affectation. It might not necessarily resonate the same way as the vast majority of their vocal range. And it might not feel very nice. It might not suit their disposition. I haven't mentioned that. I'm going to mention it later, but our dispositions about how our voice performs go into determining our fox. More about that when we get to the baritoner. Let's move on to the contralto voice, or what I typically refer to on the channel as the alto range vocalist. Your contralto often won't even realize that D5 is their secondo passaggio. They will almost always think it's there. The primo passaggio for the contralto voice is in fact generally about there, but the size of the instrument and the weight of phonation on it often results in this primo passaggio acting more like a secondo passaggio that you would expect to hear in a male constructed voice. So like that untrained vocalist we had, the untrained male vocalist a little while ago, when they sing and it gets really airy as they get to that part of their voice, the vocal fold has separated and they've got a falsetto tone production. Altos without training will frequently do that. In the few, I've had the distinct pleasure of working with quite a few alto range vocalists, I feel, in my days. And it is such a joy to work with them. That registration event, that primo passaggio, there can be almost a hard stop where the voice doesn't really want to go beyond it. And it delays the development of that range between the primo and secondo passagios, the zona di passaggio, which is in the contralto thought of as a very sort of small middle voice range. You might be an alto if that's happening for you. So as you sing up to that G sharp 4, if your voice wants to really skate off the vocal fold and get really airy, or it feels like a heavy, heavy lift, like it's really straining, those can be indicators that might be the way that your instrument is constructed. Equally, if you are very comfortable here and really delight in singing down to those notes, it just feels really good and resonant and it matches with your notes as you ascend to there, that too can be a good indicator. Now might be an interesting time to note that I haven't really talked about the upper aspects. I haven't said like you have to sing this high of a note in order to be considered a XYZ vocal range designation. And that is because the registration events are much more significant than the overall range that you can acquire. So you could be a mezzo-soprano, but never develop your range beyond that E5. It doesn't mean you're not a mezzo, it just means you haven't developed that range. And it's entirely plausible if you have habits where you're forcing your voice to go beyond the middle voice registration event. All of those things will contribute to obscuring these points of transition. Again, vowel alignment, tone production, airflow. Work on those things and your vocal range will reveal itself to you. And far better to do it that way than to go into it thinking you're one thing. And especially if you've sung in choirs and just been arbitrarily put here or put there, if you haven't aligned your vowels, that's kind of presumptuous to put someone here or put someone there without that having been done, because it's really down to vowel alignment and the registration events and the development of the voice. Another note about choirs. I've mentioned tension and habitual responses to the voice obscuring where the registration events are. Choirs don't always use the most efficient shapes of vowels. The main goal of the choir is to get the voices to blend. And so oftentimes the director will have a particular flavor of vowel in mind, or something that the vast majority of the choir is quite suited to. And this almost always isn't really the neutral form of the vowel. It's always slightly on the covered side of things. So when you think about an ah vowel, it's almost always ah, as opposed to ah. And though that difference is, some might think minor, some might think major, it sounds quite dramatic to me. That difference will contribute to obscuring where your registration event is, particularly as you move from one vowel to the next and you get really varying degrees of performance from one vowel to another. It bears to keep in mind when you think about your habits as a vocalist before you tried to work with aligning your vowels in the most neutral shapes that they can be with good breath support. Let's move on to the tenor voice. Tenor voice will, generally speaking, have a secondo passaggio somewhere between F and, in the rarest of cases, there, but that's extremely unusual. Tenors are an aberration anyway, according to Mr. Miller. So, in other words, most male vocalists will fall into the category of the baritone. Most female vocalists are constructed along the lines of the mezzo-soprano. It's in the books, and so I accept it, but I question it just the same, because if we haven't aligned our vowels and we don't have good airflow, then I don't know how we can jump to those generalizations. Perhaps if we said of trained vocalists, this is typically how it plays out, that's perhaps a different matter. But until we've aligned our vowels and until we have good, consistent, reliable, dynamic airflow, making those vocal range designations, I think, is a little on the presumptuous side of things. Anyway, tenors, you're going to have your secondo passaggio somewhere in there. Your primo passaggio will be somewhere in there, B3, C4. Generally speaking, you might be a tenor if you sing past your primo passaggio without so much as noticing it. You might have a very dramatic secondo passaggio, and you may find that it's really difficult to sing along with artists on the radio, because frequently baritones will consciously or unconsciously sing the parts down an octave and be singing along quite happily. Most of what you hear on pop music radio is singing in what we would think of as the tenor vocal range. So, you'll hear lower stuff, but generally it's going to be from here to about there. And in the untrained tenor voice, those notes like that you get from a Bruno Mars, folks like that, are going to be extremely difficult to get to without working through your registration events, coming to an understanding about how we move through the registers of our voice, establishing good airflow. So you'll have had trouble singing along with the radio. If you get kind of a throat lock, where you've got a lot of tension building in the throat, you can get to the point where you can't even sing beyond the secondo passaggio. This will frequently occur when the tenor, without knowing they're a tenor, has been pushing and pushing and pushing their voice higher and higher. And they're pushing and pushing and pushing and refusing to make that registration event. And then all of a sudden, and you get that airiness that we can't seem to go any higher beyond. We've pushed too far beyond the secondo passaggio, and there's just no parity between the chest voice musculature, thyroarytenoid musculature, and the cricothyroid or head voice musculature. And we can't reconcile the differences to get that transition. The trained tenor voice, with practice, will go back and forth across those registration events, masking it to the casual listener, and they'll get the notes that they're looking for that are in a lot of the popular tunes. Baritones, you can do that too. It's just that your registration events are in different places. So for the baritone voice, the secondo passaggio will typically be somewhere in this E4, D4 range. The E4 would be like a lyric baritone. The D4 might be your more sort of typical baritone voice. Your primo passaggio falls in the very predictable kind of B3, A3 area. The basses are still lower than that. Very, very rare to get those voices. Baritones, your primo passaggio can often be somewhat difficult to sing beyond. And the area around the secondo passaggio can be particularly challenging, sometimes even more so than the tenor voices. Establishing good adduction of the vocal fold, in my experience, has been a particular challenge for the baritones with whom I've worked. So if they've tried to sing those high notes, and again, they're pushing and pushing and pushing their voice to go higher, and there's none of that parity, then they can get stuck at the primo passaggio and have great difficulties even getting above that A3, B3 area of the voice. If that has occurred, then getting vocal fold adduction or closure above the secondo passaggio can be very challenging. Those exercises that I use for that, you can hear that hollow tone quality, but notice it's not airy. If it were airy, it would sound like this, you, as opposed to you. That's the start for the baritone, starting to bridge that divide between the head voice and the chest voice when they've had the habit of putting too much tension in the voice, ascending above the primo passaggio. Let me reiterate once again, it's more about how you use what you have than what you have. And if you start off this process thinking that you have one thing, it is entirely conceivable to try to push your voice to conform to those markers and obscure what you're really working with. Case in point, let's talk about the baritone at this point. This is a good time to discuss that. You'll notice that the lyric baritone, their secondo passaggio would be here at E4, whereas some brands of tenor will have their secondo passaggio here. And there's even a Helden tenor which has a lower secondo passaggio, but because of the dynamics of their voice, the way it operates, they're still considered a tenor. The baritenor could just as easily be a subset of those folks. So their secondo passaggio may be right around E4 or F4, or kind of sandwiched in the middle there. Again, we don't conform to the piano. And it becomes a question of how your voice operates throughout the various ranges. What is it like when you're above the secondo passaggio? Again, assuming good vowel alignment, assuming good airflow, assuming that you've made a successful transition across the secondo passaggio and you're singing voce piena in testa. How does it operate for you? What's the sustainability of it like? Does it make you really hoarse? On the other side of the equation, what's it like when you're lower down? What is your vocal response between here, G3, and C3? What is the resonance like? What does it feel like? How do you feel about singing there? Our disposition plays into our vocal range designations. The vast majority of the subsets of tenors are based a lot on those types of assertions. It's not so much where the secondo passaggio is when you start to really get into it, but how is the overall operation of your voice? And again, if you have habits of pressing beyond the normal registration points of your voice, you are almost certainly obscuring the point of transition and making it harder to figure out what your vocal range designation is. So that's it. A lot of overlap in the voices. Just being able to sing along with the tenor video or the alto video doesn't mean you're both, or that you're a tenor and an alto or something to that effect. There's an awful lot of overlap in the vocal ranges, and it's about the transitions and your disposition about how you feel and how your voice operates in the various ranges of your voice. The ranges of your voice are largely dependent on good vowel alignment and good airflow. So if you've been practicing appoggio breath management and you have worked to align your vowels in the thyroarytenoid dominant range of your voice, and you've worked on your vowel modifications, and you can make a successful transition across the secondo passaggio, then you can start to look at where all your registration events are. What is your vocal disposition like when you're singing in the different areas of your voice? Take into account your overall range, and then perhaps come to some conclusions about what your FOC, or your vocal range designation, is. And sadly, if you then switched teachers and went to someone else, they might tell you something entirely different, because different schools of thought in vocal pedagogy don't even agree entirely on how to categorize the different voices. Some schools of thought don't even accept the notion of registration events. Others suggest that there are 7. I am suggesting to you that there are 2 main points in male constructed voices, and there are 3 main points in female constructed voices to consider as you evaluate your voice and come to some conclusions about how your voice operates. And in figuring out how it operates, you can figure out your vocal range designation. I really hope this helps. If you have questions or comments, please drop them in the comments section. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing. Hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.